So I think for the sake of time, I'll immediately begin. Um, well, just about myself, I joined the Japanese Foreign Ministry in 1984. Um, I was young like you, and when you join, you choose one language of your specialization. So I, you have five choices: first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. I wrote English as my first choice. And I thought about what could be the second choice. I wrote Russian language, because I had some my friends who joined the ministry with me in the same year, who spoke already at that time very good Chinese, and the other guy, he spoke very good uh, Arabic already, amazing, and the others either French or German. And we had to choose. Unfortunately, there was no Georgian, but you have to choose amongst these, and also Spanish. And I thought Spanish, Russian, which is better. I had to choose, but I thought maybe Russia is our neighbor, and we have difficult relationship like Georgia has with this country. So maybe it's worthwhile for me to devote myself. It was 1984 when it was still a Cold War, and actually I was quite interested. Thank you, in the disarmament, because Japan was the only country who has victims from atomic bombs. Two bombs were exploded in Japan in August of 1945. And I thought disarmament is something, especially nuclear disarmament, is something that, as a diplomat, Japan should do more. And Russia is one of the most important player in responsible for the nuclear disarmament. So that's my short biography. And ever since I worked in various countries, but mostly in Russia, I served in 1980s during the Gorbachev's perestroika period in Moscow, and during the Yeltsin's period in 1998 for 3 years, and another 3 years during Putin-Medvedev period, and one more in Putin period in 2015 and 16. So I can, conduct my lecture today in Russian, but I think I should use the neutral language, which is English. Other countries that I served is United States in Washington D.C., UK, Australia, and Canada, all former British colonies, English-speaking countries. Now I'm here. I'm very glad that I'm here in Georgia, because I came here in 1980s and 1990s. I always wanted to come back. And of course, Georgia's relations towards, as I will speak at the end of my lecture, with Russia is very difficult, which needs maybe our support and support of other partners, but also your direction towards European Union and NATO is something that we support very much. So that's my background. Today I will speak about a little bit of history of Japanese diplomacy, and then I will go to today's challenges, especially in the security and the difficult security that we're now facing, security environment. And then I will speak about 5 or 6 response to this difficult challenges. And you will see a short video. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about Japan-Georgia relations today. So about this history, start from the post-war diplomacy. In 1945, on August 15th, Japan announced its capitulations, and so we surrendered. We had a huge empire of Japan, and many colonies we were occupying were separated from Japan as a signing of the San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1951. But in 45, in August after our surrender, U.S. Occupation troops came to Japan and started to revive the democratization in Japan. We had, like in Georgia in 1920s or 1910s, rise of democratic tendencies, and we had a multi-party politics. But we had also rise of militarism in the 1930s and early 40s. And that's why we could not stop our invasion in China, setting up a puppet government in Manchuria and so forth. And then eventually war with the United States and United Kingdom. So when U.S. came, they tried to revive this tendency in 1920s. And that culminated into a new constitution adopted in 1946. And it was a very strong time of strong pacifism in Japan, which I think is still very strong because people are very devastated by the result of the war. Tokyo was like, it was bombed, so it was like a flat field, no houses, just small number of buildings were left. So people hoped for peace in Japan very much. So United States, and of course it was, some people say it was Japan's own initiative to include the famous Article 9, which says that Japan renounces all war as a means to solve international conflict. And we will not have a army or military forces for that purpose. So that's 1946, and ever since, unlike Georgia, we have never made changes to the constitution. We need, unlike Georgia, we need a referendum to change the constitution. So that's another reason, but still, I think many people in Japan support this constitution. That's why, although we started very actively possible amendment. In 1950, Korean War started. So it was already 1 year before this, the Communist Party of China won the war, the civil war, against the National Party led forces. So they escaped to Taiwan. So the Cold War in Asia was already a hot war. One war fought inside China, and then another one inside Korea. So Korean War resulted in the division of our neighbor, Korean people. It is a huge tragedy. And of course, until today, we hope for the unification, peaceful unification of two Koreas, but it has not been achieved ever since. So our sense was divided inside each of us in Japanese because we hoped for peace, but we are facing this reality of Cold War. So when we signed in 1951 and then in 52 San Francisco Peace Treaty, when that went into force after 1 year, we also had sense of realism that we need certain guarantee for our security. So on the same year, we signed the Japan-U.S. Security Treaty that allows U.S. troops to remain even after the occupation ended in the same year. So for the allowing them to use our territory, part of our territory, for their presence, and eventually this treaty was revised in 1960 to clearly defines their U.S. Obligation to defend Japan. And because of this heightened tension in the East Asia over Cold War and of course elsewhere, U.S. helped us to create so-called self-defense forces. It's our army in the sense of international law, but we don't call it an army because under Article 9, it's prohibited according to our understanding or interpretation. But we still have the right to for self-defense. So that's why we call this organization. It's a full-fledged modern army now, but we call it self-defense. But nevertheless, because despite this modernity that these troops have, according to Article 9, we keep the exclusively defensive posture and security policy. So we don't have like our neighbors, nuclear weapons. We have 3 non-nuclear principles. We don't hold weapons, nuclear. We don't produce, we don't export, or not export, bring in. We just have been keeping this policy ever since 1960s. And also we don't have strategic missiles, ballistic missiles, strategic bombers, so forth. And anything that has a long reach to attack other countries. So it's a very exclusively defensive structure, which is self-defense forces. In 1956, we started to sign separately with other countries that didn't participate in San Francisco Peace Treaty. One of the first countries was the Soviet Union. Joint declaration, but this is a treaty. Although the name is declaration, it's a legally binding treaty ratified by 2 parliaments of USSR and Japan, and re-established diplomatic relations and peace. But the only remaining question was the territorial question. So this joint declaration said that 2 islands out of 4, which we claim, and we think it's our indigenous territory ever since we established contacts with Imperial Russia and established first relations in 19th century. So because of the lack of full agreement, we were not able to sign peace treaty. So we continued our negotiations ever since 1956, but we were never able to achieve any agreement on the return of 4 islands. So the joint declaration only said, it was during the Khrushchev period, that 2 islands will be returned when we sign the treaty, peace treaty. So ever since we're negotiating the status of the other 2, because we thought that when we signed the treaty, the return of 2 is already agreed in 1956, because it says it, but it didn't say if we agree on 2 islands, return of the 2 islands, then we could have signed the peace treaty at the moment of 1956. But because of this disagreement over the other 2, we continued the negotiations. Russians have different understanding of this deal in 1956, but that's another story. And right here, USSR was blocking our membership in United Nations, but after this joint declaration, they left the bloc, the prohibition, so we joined as a full member of United Nations. Ever since we've been quite active we kept the non-permanent member seat of the Security Council for many years. And GATT, I don't know how many of you know about WTO, but it was a kind of a precursor to WTO. It's a general agreement on tariffs and on trade. And this is a multilateral trade institution as part of the Bretton Woods institutions. So World Bank, IMF, and other institutions was established under the leadership and other countries. So we are gradually participating in this multilateral institution, which we help support very strongly ever since. And as we experienced a very rapid economic growth in the 60s and 70s, we later in 1975 participated in G7 summit. With other countries like Republic of Korea, which was our colony until 1945, we had long, difficult negotiations, and at last in 1965, by renouncing all the claims to each other, we signed a basic treaty between this country, now independent, in 65. And with China, we've been supporting Taiwan, or the National Party of China. So even after Communist Party took Beijing, its power in China, we continued official relations with Taiwan until 1972. But we changed sides in 1972 when Prime Minister Tanaka visited Beijing and signed a joint statement with Prime Minister Zhou Enlai. So this is a kind of a short history of our post-war era immediately after the war. Today, we're facing increasingly difficult security challenges. If you look at this map, it's very difficult to read those figures, but we are surrounded by large-scale military forces. China has about 1 million troops. I will just count the number of troops, not the number of vessels or airplanes. North Korea also has more than 1 million. Russian Far East has about 80,000, but altogether, of course, Russian Federation has much more. Whereas democratic countries like Japan has about 150,000 with 50,000 US troops. This figure says 21,000, but this is a little bit outdated. And if you look at ROK, Republic of Korea, it has about 500,000 troops with about, it says 15,000, but it's also a bit lower than real figure. So I think a little bit around more than 20,000 troops are in, US troops are in South Korea. So you see the, in terms of number of troops, the communist two countries are much bigger, and so we try to keep balance through modern weapons, including vessels and airplanes. And also, I forgot to mention Taiwan. Taiwan has about 130,000 troops. It doesn't have any U.S. presence because U.S. recognizes Beijing government as well, but it has support of United States through its domestic legislation in Washington and providing weapons by United States. So this is a kind of a military balance, and if we look at the security structure, we have very weak security cooperation. Unlike in Europe, you have NATO and European Union. We don't have anything like that. So U.S. has individual security arrangements, like I said, with Japan, U.S.-Japan security treaty that I mentioned. U.S.-South Korea, same, similar arrangement. Taiwan, I already mentioned, this export of arms to Taiwan from the United States. And we have a little bit of Philippines in the south. U.S.-Philippine mutual security arrangement is there. So we don't have multilateral structure. We just have series of bilateral arrangements. But we don't have a strong security cooperation with China or other countries, Russia. We do have a military-to-military dialogue, limited amount of joint cooperation with Russia or China. We mean Japan, but the degree of cooperation is much less, of course, compared to Japan, U.S. Of course, we have technically South and North Korea are at war yet, so they don't have peace treaty yet. So hot war is technically not finished, and we don't have diplomatic relations. We haven't recognized North Korea at all. So this is a kind of confrontational relationship we have. Now, individual items here. Here I start with North Korea. This is a real direct threat to us because it has conducted a nuclear testing in the past, and also they have testing its short, middle, and long-range ballistic missiles, which is prohibited by UN Security Council sanctions. And they also have a very specific issue about abduction. North Korea has abducted at least 17 Japanese nationals, and they were taken away from Japanese soil by North Korea spies. and many of them are trained to be a teacher of Japanese language, to train future North Korean spies to be installed in Japan. And uh, um, thanks to our efforts, diplomatic efforts, 5 of them has been returned to Japan, but others are still remaining, including a 14-year-old girl when she was abducted in 1970s. And the parents and family members are really uh, hoping for the early return because parents themselves are becoming older and older. When I heard about Georgia's experience in the last years, couple of years about taking of Georgian citizens by Russian soldiers into the occupied territory, I thought it's also another tragedy for the family members and of course all Georgians. It's also maybe different situation, different countries involved, but I understood the tragic nature of the event. And the next one here is it's about China. Attempts to unilaterally change status quo on East and South China Seas. It is formulated in a very technical way, but in another term, violating territorial integrity or trying to change a situation where you have a territorial dispute, especially on the islands, by unilateral means. One example is our Japanese Senkaku Islands. It's inside this red circle. It's a small island. The pictures here, but it has been Japanese territory ever since 19th century. Chinese never protested against our annexation because it wasn't owned by anybody. They have started to their claim against Japan only in early 1970s when United Nations found some oil and gas deposit underneath the sea surrounding these islands. So ever since end of 2000s and until now, for more than 10, 12 years, Chinese are sending government ships, Coast Guard ships, to the territorial waters of Senkaku Islands. And this is a illegal action by Chinese vessels because they only have the right of innocent passage, so-called in international law, when they pass by the others' territorial waters, whereby these Chinese vessels, they just float, intrude into our territory, and then float for several hours or half a day or even longer. And this has been occurring every several times a month ever since around 2008. It never stopped. So this is a very huge concern for us. And then South China Sea. These two pictures clearly shows you how the island disputed over China, Vietnam, and Taiwan has changed by Chinese military occupation. It started a bit earlier than 2014. They have dumped, their concrete and everything. So coral reef, it's a natural sanctuary, was converted into a virtual military base. And of course, this is not based on international law. And of course, the dispute of territorial sovereignty over these islands has to be resolved in a peaceful dispute settlement mechanism. So we are very much concerned about this kind of unilateral action by Chinese. And lastly, changes in China-Taiwan military balance. This is a relatively new phenomenon, but this is an old intention. Very from the beginning, Chinese Communist Party has declared, and Chinese state has been declaring that they have never abandoned. They want to so-called liberate Taiwan by military forces. They have never abandoned this policy. And under this kind of clear declaration of their policy, the military balance in favor of China is a grave concern. So these are the huge challenges we're facing. And I forgot to mention this black circle on your right upper hand side are the northern territories we call the Four Islands, which we think is our indigenous territory and now currently occupied by Russia. Now, our response, I will mention 5 or 6. We, under our national security strategy, we adopted a phrase called proactive contribution to peace, because after the war, because of the pacifism, peace-loving emotion of Japanese people has been very strong, and we always wanted to be a nation which can gain respect and from other countries by contributing to international peace and stability. And we don't want to be receptive. We want to be active in order to build this peace. So that's why this phrase. And there's a lot of things we're doing, but I wanted you to know about 5 or 6. Strengthening Japan-US alliance, our ally. 2, cooperation with partners, including European Union and others, in maintaining international order based on fundamental values and rules. So value mean, of course, democracy, human rights and rule of law, freedom of navigation on the sea, free trade, and so forth. We all, Georgia, Japan, shares most, not most, but all of them. So I think there's a relevancy to Georgia as well. And of course, rules. I mentioned free trade, other rules of international law, which Georgia is part of it. So we, I think, have a lot. And in this sense, we are very strong partners that can support many of the rules and values that we hold in international cooperation. And 3rd, promotion of free trade and investment. I'll talk a little bit about later. And 4th, wider use of official development aid. So we support developing countries through our budget. It's called official development aid. But we're now expanding its use in order to be more proactive in peacemaking and stability, prosperity for international community. And that also, of course, include a fight against COVID-19. And all these wider efforts are actually now formulated into one vision called Free and Open Indo-Pacific. And because of the acronym FOIP, F-O-I-P, I will, from now on, I'll just say FOIP instead of Free and Open Indo-Pacific. And I will explain what it is. And lastly, the public diplomacy, how we reach out to the public. Now, 1, strengthening Japan-US alliance. There was Prime Minister Suga Yasuhide of Japan and Joe Biden meeting in Washington, D.C. just 2 weeks ago. It was the first face-to-face meeting for Mr. Biden ever since, with foreign leaders, ever since he took his office. And some of the highlights here, first, enhancing deterrence and response capabilities. Basically, it's diplomatic but also military cooperation between the two countries in order to respond to this difficult security challenges that I mentioned and deepen defense cooperation. That was one achievement. We have been doing this for many years now, but we want to do more and further. Second, concerns over Chinese activities. The leaders expressed the activities that I mentioned, inconsistent with rule-based order. The 2 concerns over Chinese activities, mainly in East China Sea, the Senkaku Islands, as well as South China Sea. And we, at the same time, while we're trying to demonstrate the freedom of navigation and the importance of international law on the sea, we want, of course, to talk to Chinese and communicate our positions and have a candid discussions with China. Of course, it's not easy, but we need to communicate and ask Chinese, request them to be more responsible in upholding these principles that we care so much. And I would say China is also a beneficiary to this important principles, free trade and freedom of navigation, because sea lane that connects China and other countries, where huge amount of goods and services come back and forth, is vital to China as well as to Japan or U.S. or Georgia. China is one of the major trading partners of Georgia, so you're benefiting from this long supply chain that connects Georgia and Asia and other countries. So here again there's a relevance to Georgia itself. Third one, complete denuclearization of North Korea and abiding by the United Nations Security Council resolution. Denuclearization is very clear to you, and of course we want. I didn't mention because it's too long, but we want to have stop the missile program as well, and reverse it and destroy all the missiles and nuclear weapons in a verifiable way and in irreversible way, which is clearly mentioned in United Nations Security Council resolutions. And in this resolution also they clearly defines the substance of sanction against North Korea, including the prohibition by North Korea of import of that means embargo of export of oil to this country. It's a basic energy source, and we have other sanctions, import of industrial goods that has implications to their development of military capability. So we are having our military or our self-defense forces and other countries' military forces to monitor the seas surrounding North Korea so that they will abide by the resolution, because we oftentimes find the vessel-to-vessel transfer of prohibited goods on the sea. So we take pictures and we report to the Security Council so that the other countries cooperating with North Korea, we don't know who they are, but will not participate in this kind of on-the-sea transfer of embargoed goods. Then here, cooperation in achieving FOIP, free and open in the Pacific. So Japan and United States are having a very similar concept of this, which I will talk later. So we have a lot of synergy in cooperation. So that's what the leaders agreed to do. And lastly, launching new partnership in innovation, COVID-19 response, and green growth. So we're one of the leaders in innovative technology in many of the areas, in green and digital especially. Response 2, cooperation with partners. First, these are just two examples I decided to bring in. Australia, India, Japan, and US. We just had a first Quad meeting, as you see on the right-hand top right-hand side picture, in March. So these are all Japanese guys here. Only guys, unfortunately, no women here. But if you see the flags and the screen, you see the the other three leaders. Prime Minister Suga that's he, and this is Foreign Minister of Japan, and I think President Biden and Prime Minister Morrison of Australia, and Prime Minister Modi of India. And we reaffirmed the commitment for free and rule-based order in the Pacific and beyond. So we really share a lot what I've been discussing with these other three countries, not just with United States, but also Australia, India. And not coincidentally, all these are, of course, democratic countries and share the fundamental values that I've been repeatedly today mentioning. So that's a kind of natural grouping. It's not alliance. We don't have any treaty. It's a kind of a group of governments that share many actions and values and cooperation. But it's not like a NATO type of military organization. But still, it's a very strong cooperation with partners. And another example is with the European Union. It's strategic. We call strategic partner agreement, which we signed in 2018. We call SPA, and there was the signing ceremony. You see the former Prime Minister Abe with EU leaders. It's basically almost everything that we share, starting from cooperation and democracy in any of the countries, including Georgia. I'll mention about it later. And also peaceful settlement of disputes in all over the world. So it's a kind of political agreement to promote peace and stability on the basis of shared values all over the world. So those are the kind of things that we are going to cooperate, and that is not only. We have also additionally signed in next year, 2019, connectivity partnership. This is very interesting because when we say connectivity, it could mean infrastructure of sustainable type or high quality infrastructure that have implications for social or environmental rules. We keep the high level of having a least impact of environment or any social impact like employment. So we have the high standards in promoting joint cooperation and building infrastructure in the world in between Japan and European Union. So Georgia is part of it, and I am discussing right now with the European Union ambassador here the possibility how we can cooperate in Georgia in terms of enhancing Georgia's infrastructure and thus enhancing Georgia's role as a connectivity country, connecting Asia and Europe. So that's our partnership. 3, promotion of free trade and investment. Japan's major FTA and EPA and other trade agreements. FTA is free trade agreement. So basically it reduces tariff and establish rule common to many of us so that we can promote free flow of trade as much as possible. So basically we're decreasing the tariff so there will be no barrier. And the EPA is economic partnership agreement. And it is wider than FTA. It includes FTA, but it also covers investment and other rules. So that we can have more mutual cooperation flow of capitals with each other. So if you look at the map, we have Japan-EU EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement. It's an approximate circle, but the yellow is covering Japan and European Union. And RCEP is a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It's a EPA, including ASEAN countries. ASEAN is Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So that's like Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar right now having a huge problem by military regime, and Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and so forth. So this is a 10 countries association. Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, and Republic of Korea. I put in India in parentheses because India was participating in negotiations, but they decided not to sign. So we say to the Indians that its doors are open, but when you're ready, please sign the treaty. That's circled in blue. And what is in orange is Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. It's a very high level of rule-setting agreement with Australia, Brunei, Canada, China, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and United States. But in parentheses, they signed, unlike India, they signed, but they decided not to ratify. Under Mr. Trump's administration, they decided to opt out. So although the circle covers a little bit of United States, the U.S. is not part. Others, Japan-U.S. trade agreement, Japan-UK comprehensive EPA. So in short, we are trying to expand the free trade rule-based order as multilateral as possible with our partners. So we're now bind with Chinese, South Koreans, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, huge. And if India joins, it's going to be the biggest in terms of population coverage in the world. And in terms of the high-level standard-setting function that we have is TPP. I think that's the highest, but also Japan-EU EPA is another example. And by the way, the green are the partners that are binding us with a free trade agreement or EPA. Red is still under negotiations. So why India is green? Because we have Japan-India bilateral FTA instead of this RCEP. 4, wider use of official development aid. What is ODA? It's a grant assistance to developing nations. Technical assistance, when we say technical assistance, that means training. So we dispatch our experts to train people in the recipient countries or invite experts to Japan to train them. And loan, so we provide loan, especially yen loan, to the recipient countries. They have to return the loan, but it's very long-term and low interest. It's lower than commercial bank rate. So it's a concessional. We say it's easy for the recipients to lend and borrow and return. Investment finance, we sometimes do. These are done by our JICA or our embassy as well. JICA is Japan International Cooperation Agency, and JICA does investment finance. It's a loan or acquisition of shares in a private sector. If you say loan, we lend essentially to the government. If it's Georgian government, we lend to Georgian Minister of Finance. And I'm sure because of COVID, all developing nations' Minister of Finance are borrowing a lot because you need to. But in case of investment finance, JICA can buy shares in the private sector of recipient country or give loans to the private sector. So it will not affect the debt accumulation of the recipient country. And other two principles under what? We're assisting self-help. So we are not imposing something. We don't want the recipient countries to do that they don't want to. So in other words, we really care for ownership. Unless you have the ownership of your own project, unless it doesn't say anything in your country's development strategy, maybe the effect of our assistance will be much less. So, and if you feel like, okay, Japan, please help us. You can do it whatever you want in our country. We don't care. That's not the way. We only say if you have your ownership over your project and your own development strategy, then you must identify where you want us to do, and that's where we want to do. So that's more effective and more will achieve more results in that way. And then non-military purpose. remember what I said about Japanese pacifism and Pacific, or the peaceful contribution, proactive pacifism, or peace policy of Japan. So we don't give military equipments to other countries through ODA. We have changed slightly our way of arms non-export principles. We are now allowing, for the purpose of joint exploration or development of military equipment with other countries. Then we'll do to a certain limited extent, but we'll still have a very strict standards, and we don't allow arms export to those countries who are now fighting others or in conflict with others. That will just exacerbate military conflict, and that's against our principle. So those are the what's and why we're doing this, because we want to promote peace, security, and prosperity. Of course, these are universal hope for all of us, but how we can achieve it when the recipient countries doesn't have sufficient capability. So that's our role is. All the donor countries, not just like us, but also European Union or United States, other donors, I'm sure they share the same principles. And second, clear creation of a transparent and predictable international environment. I spoke about worsening, challenging international environment surrounding us. So we want to have, all of us would like to have a transparent, predictable environment in the international arena. Otherwise, we cannot really act decisively for the sake of our own people as a better life, or for the sake of international cooperation for a better, peaceful, stable relationship. So we want to create that through development aid. And last one is maintenance of international order based on universal values. So we ask recipient countries, for promotion of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. And we don't want to encourage those governments who are engaged in any program or systematic way of breaching human rights and other programs. So this is our reason why we're doing this. And what are the priority issues and areas in our ODA? Maybe just three examples. One, or three principles. Achieving quality growth is our aim, number one aim. What is quality growth? It's, as it says, it should be inclusive. When we grow, then it should have other, it should be gender equal growth, or it should not be excluding some kind of minority people in your country. It should be inclusive. Bringing in those who are handicapped physically. So it should be a promotion of inclusive society. Sustainable, especially in terms of climate change, it should, or use of natural resources, it cannot be against the sustainability of the economy. And resilient, we feel weakness when we're hit by, let's say, national disaster or war, international conflict. So we want to be the recipient countries to be resilient and not susceptible to this kind of threat. Although, of course, we aim at non-military development or assistance. So some of the examples: high-quality infrastructure. I mentioned that we cooperate with European Union. So we want to cooperate in Georgia to achieve this goal as one example. Skill developments. So we want to have skilled personnel in order to achieve these quality growth. So we need to train as many people as possible to be part of this inclusive, sustainable, resilient growth. Number two principle, sharing universal values. I've been saying this so many times about this, but we want the recipient countries to share with us these universal values and realizing a peace and secure society. So things like governance, when we say governance, that means a democratic, stable society building. and that's not easy. We also had some problems. I mentioned about the rise of militarism in 1930s. We overcame, and with the help of international community, we achieved a high degree of mature democracy. But I'm sure other countries, especially I believe in Georgia's democracy, despite of difficulties you have been facing in the last couple of not just months but years maybe, but we help you, and I personally believe in the success, and that's what we do through our governance assistance. And talked about secure, peaceful society and natural disaster. So there's overlap between first and second, but especially if you focus on safety and security of the society, I think what we can do to recipient countries is disaster relief, because we are so prone to natural disasters, starting from huge earthquake we had in 2011. About 20 million people lost their lives or missing still. And typhoon or flood, all kinds of natural disasters come to Japan every year, unfortunately. But we learn also at the same time lessons. So we strengthen our infrastructure, we strengthen our society by training. Every year we do the training against big earthquake in schools or in universities or even at home, so that we can be, kids can be, when you hear it's earthquake, then kids just hide inside, below the table, and so that they will not be hit by, falling roof or whatever. So this is a kind of example, but we would like to help other countries to be more resilient. And if the real disaster happens, we want to rescue the people, victims. And that's why we say disaster relief is very important. Police and Coast Guards, we want to assist the police structure in each country, which is very central to keeping a stable society with less crimes. Maybe it's transparency, police not taking bribes, for example. So we want to establish stronger police, friendly police actually to the people, local people, visible police, but not offending people. And Coast Guards, especially I talked about violation of freedom of navigation, or peaceful violation of peaceful settlement of territorial dispute on the sea. So we don't help navies because it's against non-military principle, but we help Coast Guards because it's for the safety of the sea surrounding the developing nations, and it's good for fishing people or their safety in general. And the last one is addressing global issues and human security. First, global issues. It's like if you have heard about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, there are lots of important principles written there, like health, education, gender equality. All these are very important for all of our countries. So we help them achieving as much as possible under this global issues agenda. And also we are promoting, this is a made in Japan concept, human security. We talk about state security, but we also would like to promote the idea of human security. And what is it? It says here, human security is to achieve the security of each individual through protecting them if it's war, if it's natural disaster, whatever threat that hits him or her, and also empowering, giving the skills and powers so they can be more resilient to this kind of threat that is imposed on each individual. So we use official development aid in order to enhance this human security. And we apply this concept also in Georgia, especially in connection with the conflict resolution, the people who had to evacuate tragically from occupied territories after the war in 2008. So that's human security. And of course, the second part, I forgot to mention the environment, and as a first part, global issue part, environment and climate change is very important in our assistance agenda. Now, next one. Oops. Free and open in the Pacific, FOIP. Very shortly, in short, it's a kind of all combined region-wide concept of what I've been telling you. So why in the Pacific, not just Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, because it's so integrated right now through value chain. And you see the red dots, these are sea lane where the vessels traded goods and services go back and forth. We need the peace and stability in these two oceans. That's one reason. The second reason is so much of the centers of growth are concentrated in these areas. Of course, Indo-Pacific or the Asia itself is a kind of a center of growth for many years now. But also, if we look at this Indian Ocean's the western borders, we touch almost Africa. We include Africa because Africa is part of it's a future potential for investment and trade for all of us. So we include this part of Africa as well. That's the reason. And what we do are things like these: promotion of rule-based order. I've been telling this in trade, in security on the sea, applying international law. So I also mentioned maritime security. It's maritime meaning sea security. Promotion of free trade I mentioned, and enhancing connectivity, it's infrastructure and people-to-people connection as well, through high-quality exchange. And this is Japan's own concept and vision, but other countries are also having their own. After we have been advocating this idea for several years now, U.S. is part of it, or one of them, and other partners in the Pacific include ASEAN countries, the Southeast Asian countries. They are collectively adopted. They have adopted outlook on Indo-Pacific. There are lots of similarities, overlaps with our vision. We don't advocate any one single vision. We welcome ASEAN version of Indo-Pacific vision. And European Union, as far as up there, are very much now interested in Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific. And they have just last week, I think, published the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. There are, again, a lot of similarities with ours, and also they have their own ideas. So we welcome all these, it will be in kind of a collective endeavor in which we will be having a more prosperous, stable, and rule-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Public diplomacy. There are several elements. This picture is my lecture at Kutaisi International University. I talked a bit different things about Japan's economic success and challenges, not about diplomacy. But that was in March when I visited Kutaisi. And now we have Japan houses in London or other major cities in the world to demonstrate Japanese culture. And these are the examples. But what we do here is mentioned here: actively communicate information of Japan's policy, not just foreign policy like I'm doing today, but also general information about Japan, which I did in Kutaisi, so that you will have better understanding of Japan. Whether you agree or not, it's probably a little bit of secondary. Of course, we hope that we support or agree, but it's up to you. It's freedom of thought. So our kind of hope is that to have better understanding. Without understanding, you cannot really oppose or support or agree. So that's the very basic goal that we put in front of us in conducting public diplomacy. And of course, in substance, I've been telling you about the importance of FOIP and other Japanese foreign policy goals. So Of course, the substance is it's obvious that that's something that Japanese government does for the sake of peace and stability in the world. Now, secondly, engage with policymakers, opinion leaders, related experts, and local people. Maybe students here today falls under local people, but you're a very important part of future opinion leaders or future policymakers. So we really communicate to young people. Young people will be deciding the future. So that's why I did the same on a different subject in Kutaisi as well. And of course, I have done a lecture at Rondelli Institute of International Relations. They're the experts that, or young government officials who are already in part of the policy decision making in the government. So that's what we do. And this one, assist activities to introduce Japanese culture. So we are doing a lot of different cultural events in Georgia or elsewhere. Or in case of London, we have opened this Japan House where we exhibit arts of Japan. But as it says here, assist activities. We do ourselves as owner of the event, but also we support other people's attempts or interesting events to promote Japanese culture. So, as students, if you are planning to hold any event related to Japanese culture, of course, you can turn to us for consultation. If there's anything that we can do, we are here to assist your activities to introduce Japanese culture to Georgian people. And this one, to exchange people to people connection. This is also very important. You will see in the next page a video example of inviting young people from all over the world. You will see first woman, there will be, I think, 3 foreigners coming to Japan to study about Japan. First woman is from Caucasus. She is Azerbaijani, and she's a neuroscientist. So she studies about neurons in the brain. But she was so fascinated with Japanese culture, she decided to stay longer. And you will see how she has achieved a lot. The last one is promotion of Japanese language. So I'm very glad that the reason why I'm here today is amongst many Georgian universities, you're the most advanced, in my opinion, in terms of Japanese language education. So I decided to choose your university as a first venue for this lecture. But we promote Japanese language education through many means, through college studies like here, but also through conducting Japanese language testing. Do you test twice a year? Twice a year, yes. So probably you have many questions on this, so I look forward to that. So these are the public diplomacy. So let's look at one video here.
My fascination about Japan started when I read a book about Japanese culture and Buddhism. So I came here for 2 weeks and I ended up living 6 years at Daijoji Temple. During my stay in the temple, I was practicing Japanese culture such as tea ceremonies. At the same time, I was also doing my studies in neuroscience. So I decided to work together with local people of Mount Hakkasan. For me, they are the keepers of traditional knowledge, the ones from which we should learn.
When I was a teenager, I was interested in Japanese culture, like modern Japanese literature. And when I became a university student, I had an opportunity to do a 6-month internship in Japan. Then I did a PhD with the support of the Japanese government scholarship. My career is a very popular application in Japan and currently have members coming from 40 different countries. And so I enjoy having people from different perspectives working together toward a common goal.
I was born in Martinique, which is a French island. I got an opportunity to do a 1-month internship in Japan. When I heard that Sony CSL wanted to make a new lab in Kyoto, I decided to volunteer. I really like Kyoto because I think it's a good example of this philosophy of first understanding something deeply before you try to change it. In artificial life, we are trying to build life, and to do that, we need a wide array of different experts, for example, in biology or chemistry or even philosophy. And when all of these different people get together, that's when we get the most creativity and new ideas for research.
So, those are three people who came to study in Japan and ended up to live longer and even start working. So my last presentation will be on Japan-Georgia relations. So I'll be very brief here, and of course you can ask many questions. We, of course, I said repeatedly, we share values and we support your Euro-Atlantic aspiration. And this is not only good for European Union, but also for Japan. If we have a wider European Union with democratic values, of course, that is something beneficial to Japan as well, and for the international community. And the support for territorial integrity in Georgia. I visited the administrative borderline near South Ossetia and got a briefing from State Protection Agency guys here in the picture. But it was a bit scary because I saw the Russian soldier beyond the fence, just 200 meters away, confronting against the Georgian police. No shooting, fortunately, but of course it's part of Georgia's territory, and still I saw the reality of occupation in my eyes. ODA projects and COVID-related assistance. I went to Nikosi village near this administrative borderline. It's a small village, but it has a small clinic to which we provided medical equipment. And it's part of our human security, which I talked about, human security grant project. And I was fascinated with Japanese Shimazu-made X-ray machine, which is connected to Tbilisi. So I saw invisible human being in front of me using the equipment, looking at the X-ray picture and trying to use distantly using the computer to make a diagnosis of. It was like, I think it was a leg of a person, of a patient, and with some problems. And the doctor in Tbilisi, looking at this picture of a patient in Nikosi using Japanese equipment, at least for me, it was first time to see the distance medicine in front of my eyes. And then promotion of trade and investment. Last year, despite of COVID, TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, decided to invest in hydropower plant. Hydropower plant now has a lot of demonstrations in Kutaisi or even in Tbilisi, but this one has been in compliance with all the norms related to environment and social standards. And Japanese energy giant TEPCO's renewable energy branch decided to acquire part of this the stock or shares last year. So this was one of the huge investment, good news for Japan-Georgia's relations. And when I arrived last December, and then in January, I signed with the Minister of Economy investment treaty. It's protection of investment both ways and also promotion. So I hope that this will send a good signal to Japan's investors like TEPCO for future investments. And last one's culture and people-to-people ties. Cultural events that I mentioned, we have done bonsai online lecture, and there's a Rusko, our staff is here. She was central to organizing this. And what's the name of this gentleman?
Alexandre Meschi, Mr.
Yes. Mr. Meschi is expert in Japanese bonsai. You know, bonsai is a miniature plant or tree. So we love to miniaturize almost everything in our garden. So he's an expert. While being, has he been to Japan?
No,
Never been. But he self-studied all this, and he's now expert, now teaching other Georgians who love bonsai in Tbilisi. So that's the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your brilliant presentation and very informative lecture. So I guess we have some time for questions, and if anybody wants to start, please raise your hand or just start talking. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for your interesting lecture. And about my question, as you know, Japanese government has decided to release the radioactive waters in the ocean in Fukushima. So what kind of feedback have you received from the Japanese and international societies and non-governmental organizations? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. A good question. Yes. Maybe we should gather a couple questions more? Yes, and answer.
Yes. Please.
First of all, thank you very much for listening to us. A very interesting presentation. And my question is about the first topic you have discussed during the presentation. And
What
first of all,
question about what?
Japanese relations with the United States.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder to what extent their relations goes beyond the security-related issues, and I mean especially the cooperation in terms of the green growth or cooperation in terms of the sustainable development. After the fact that the United States did not sign the Kyoto Protocol, but the United States has recently joined the Paris Agreement. And of course, what are, from your point of view, the prospects in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And then one more question.
I also thank you for such a comprehensive and interesting lecture. I've got two brief questions, one about foreign policy. From your personal experience, what do you think is the kind of values or the point of views that sets aside Japan from the world, from the US, for example, or EU countries, in regard of foreign policy or public policy? And the second question is just a question: what can Georgia learn from Japan? One important lesson. Thank you.
The first question was about what we expect from European Union, and
it's about a foreign policy, like one specific part of foreign policy that is unique to Japan.
I see.
Thank you.
One more, Ambassador, or just?
Yes, maybe I'll respond now. So in terms of radioactive water, the substance that is in the water, in terms of the level of the substance, is lower than international standards. So the International Atomic Agency or Atomic Energy Agency, which is a major organization in the world that makes promotes safety use of nuclear energy, has been commenting on this, and this is a much lower level than the norm. And also WHO, the World Health Organization, they're not just busy with COVID-19, but also they can make comments on the health of the water quality, and they also endorsed the safety of this water, which will be released to the ocean. This water was, went through all the processes that is necessary to lower the level until this level that we have achieved. So, interestingly, that's most likely is lower level of radioactive substance that is included in natural water that I drink or we drink. And I'm not a scientist, but this particular substance has a unique nature that is not effective on our health if it's under the level agreed by the scientists, including the international organizations I mentioned. So in that sense, it's totally safe. And just add to you, because I understand your question, because there's a lot of reports coming from Japan, especially the fishermen. They are concerned about this. But I would say their concern is not of the quality of the water itself. They're concerned about the reputation of the fish that they will be catching and selling, because you cannot really dictate the judgment of other people who the buyers of the fish, the sea products. So if those people are kind of influenced by a false image of the possible effect of this water, then they will refrain from buying the fish they catch. So they will lose money. The fishermen will lose money. So that's the link that they have in mind. So I think our government's job is to explain to the people or to the wider audience in other countries who import our seafood or fish that this is totally safe and internationally endorsed water, and clear understanding of the fact is very important. We have to be based on science rather than word of mouth or false information. And on Japan-U.S. relations, yes, beyond security, yes, as I said, as you said, of course, other areas are very important. For example, I mentioned about the Japan-U.S. trade agreement. It's because we are huge partners in terms of trade and investment. Especially Japanese investments destination mostly goes to North America, United States. Of course, our investment in Asia is increasing, but still, U.S. has a very mature business environment, and it's very easy to do business, but also it's also very competitive. But still, there's a huge opportunity for our business. So this is a business-to-business cooperation. And the other one is this agreement between Prime Minister Suga and President Biden on innovation, including green innovation. In case of Japan, we would like to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. So we have to reduce a huge amount of emission. And recently, also again, Mr. Biden hosted a leaders meeting on climate change, in which Prime Minister, through video conference this time, announced to reduce our emission by 46% by 2030 compared to 2013. And here it's going to be a huge reduction that we have to achieve. So what is needed is the innovation. Without not just gradual step-by-step innovation, but we need a huge leap towards here to there. That it could be something like promotion of hydrogen technology. We invented, or we have now put in market our Japanese companies like Honda or Toyota hydrogen cars. So they produce electricity using hydrogen, and it moves with hydrogen energy. Innovation is essential to achieve this green growth in any country, including Georgia. You have advantage because you have hydropower. With all these difficulties now you're facing with the demonstration, I think I'm sure you can overcome this, and you have the people's understanding and support for this green energy. And you also have other areas like solar or wind energies as well, and we can help in promoting these green economy in Georgia. So, in short, U.S.-Japan will be cooperating in innovation in green technology. Also, you didn't mention other areas like quantum computing. It's a new type of computer. It's not like this computer. It's totally different principle and much has greater capability, or biological technology. So, as two leaders in the world of groundbreaking innovation, we'll be cooperating even further, and we want to make them available to other countries, including Georgia. Yes. And the last question is another uniqueness, maybe our peace policy, our history in the post-war world, what we have achieved, through aiding other countries, not using military means, solving using the international law. Of course, other countries also as well, but maybe Japan's own experience as a country suffered from nuclear bombing twice. Maybe it's a quite unique Japaneseness to promote this kind of peace policy, especially not just non-nuclear principles, but also you have heard the word non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. So that's why we are so strongly against the North Korean nuclear weapons development program as well. So that's probably the answer.
Thank you. If we may, some more questions, Ambassador, it's okay?
Yes, of course.
Please.
First of all, thank you for coming. It was a very interesting speech. I have two questions. My first question is, it's not very related, but since you talked about geopolitics, I want to know your opinion about this. So it's immigration. It's been a hot topic, controversial as well, among Western societies. For example, Middle Eastern, African immigration in Europe, diversity in the United States. And I've heard a lot of people criticize Japan about its lack of multiculturalism and diversity. I personally disagree with that, but I want to know what your opinion is about that. As far as I know, Japan has very strict immigration policy. And my second question is, if I can take a picture with you.
Of course. Maybe not just with you, but with anybody who wishes. Yes. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
If I may.
Sure.
I want to know if Japanese government and the Japanese companies have an interest to invest in Akira seaport, and
He sounds like professional diplomat.
what kind of interest should it be? Thank you.
One more question.
Good.
Oh,
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And I have a question. You mentioned that a couple of days ago, you signed the investment treaty with the Ministry of Economy. I was wondering, Japan plans to start negotiations on a free trade agreement with Georgia. As you know, a couple of years ago, China signed a free trade agreement, and we have free trade agreement with China, with the European Union, not with Japan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shall I answer? Yes. So in terms of immigration policy, yes, we were cautious about opening our labor market to foreigners until recently, but we are gradually, step by step, opening up. Until recently, maybe for skilled labor, but through our training program, we're now opening our labor market to unskilled labor to some extent as well. when I say skilled labor and unskilled labor, maybe skilled labor is those who are trained in certain specialized areas, and unskilled labor may be a little bit simpler work. The reason why we're moving this way is maybe because that one maybe self-centered, a little bit self-centered reason is that our labor market is very tight. We have very low unemployment right now, like around 2.8% or 2.9%. Before COVID, it was like 2.43. So it's full employment. Those who are in under 2% category, they're just looking for new jobs. So virtually whoever, including young people like graduates from university, if you want to have a job, of course, sometimes you have to take a job that is not of your willing, but if you don't prefer so much, then you can have a job, any job, even young people. So it's full employment. Under COVID, this has become a little bit difficult, but still a very tight labor market. So we wanted to bring in first women, because we're not so good at gender equality, although we put huge efforts right now. So we're now having more women than in the United States in our labor market who are working. So U.S. probably is better in terms of number of women who are in the decision-making strata. So we are still having a less number there. But we now introduced a huge number of women in our labor market, yes. But it's still the unemployment rate is very low. It's not going up. So we needed some more. We then started to raise the pension age. So it used to be 60, then now it's going to be 65. So you have to find work if you are jobless at the age of 60, or you have to ask the private sector. The government is asking the private sector to have your employee work longer until the new retirement age. So gradual, it's not jump from 60 to 65, but gradual rise to 65. So we are bringing them in because we are also aging rapidly. And about more than nearly 30% of our population is over 65 years old. By the way, we need to vaccinate them first, so we're struggling very hard to vaccinate them. It's around 36 million over 65 years of age. And so it's almost like 10 times of your population are over 65 in Japan. But we need to have them work more and more and more. And then we still have tight labor market. So now we're bringing in the foreign workers. But of course, there are conservative views in Japan. So they are concerned about instability or maybe rise of crime rates. We have a very low crime rate in Japan. So if we bring in them, maybe some of them, I like those foreign people now working in our stores. Our store vendors, they have a name holder on you, so you can easily tell, even by name. Oh, are you from India? I ask. Are you from China? And they say yes or no, and we start conversation with storekeepers. So we see a lot of foreigners working in Japanese local stores. But so they are very nice, but there are maybe some people who think that there will be other elements coming in from outside, looking at other countries' examples and so forth. So we have this delicate balance of pros and cons, and that's why we're moving gradually. And in terms of multiculturalism, I think if you look at our past history, you must have studied our history of Japan. We're open to different cultures. We had a period of openness to Christianity, especially Catholicism in the 16th or 17th century. And then we saw some of the local lords who became converted to Christianity, decided to support the uprising against the Edo government in Tokyo. So they suppressed those Christian daimyos, the local lords. So there were conflict over religion. But there were times when we were open. Then, of course, after the middle of 19th century, when we started modernization, we freed all the religions. The exception was this militarism period. And then, of course, after the war, it's totally ensured by the constitution. And also another example is tourists, foreign tourists. We're now having. We used to have. We have a population of about 125 million people, and in 2000, let's say let's take five, we only had about 8 million foreign tourists in Japan, or visitors. Although it's very short, of course, they stay maybe 1 week, not like a permanent employees. They stay just short, but just as an example of our openness. That number increased from 5 million or 8 million to 35 million. Before COVID, it was like 35 million. So it's a huge number. And maybe 8 or 9 people came from China, mainland China. So they saw real Japan and they got friends and they went back and they sent SNS, word of mouth, good impression about Japan. So I think it's a huge economy now, huge business, like in Georgia. Although we're lagging behind from Georgia because you have now, at the peak, you used to have almost 9 million tourists. So almost 2.5 times of your population in this country. We can't do that, but it's just 3.5 million. But still, it's a huge one for us, including our neighbors coming us. So this shows our openness and try to have be hospitable, and I think it's a good gesture or sign of a multicultural nature. There are lots of arguments. I know that there's kind of criticism that we get about our closed doors, but I want to say that it's not the case. And Anakuya, board? Yes. So yes, I said about connectivity many times in today's presentation, and I know that this is one of the critical elements still missing in terms of movement of cargo from Asia to Europe or vice versa, because the major cargo between Asia and Europe has been moved through huge containers, and it requires huge container ships. I don't know, have you seen the Japanese, it's actually Japanese, Suez Canal accident? This is Japanese-owned vehicle or the vessel, but you could see how big it is. And that's what they use for Asia-Europe sea lane trade. And we need that in inland route that goes through Japan, China, Central Asia, Caucasus, Black Sea, or Turkey, and then in Europe. So I think Anakuya has to be developed in order to improve the cargo movement between the two areas. How we can find the investors, and how we can help is another question. Maybe it's too premature. We need to really dig deeper, like they dig right now, the bottom of the sea, so that they can achieve the deep water port. And last question about FTA. And yes, I know that Georgia has concluded FTA with China. Japan-Georgia trade, I would say, is still very small in terms of amount. So we really need to understand how much would be the effect in trade liberalization, because you already enjoy the general preference treatment. I forgot the special terminology for this, but you have been enjoying lower tariffs than other countries, developed countries. So what we export to you and what you export to us, how much will be affected if we even further go down? I think that's the question. And we always do the feasibility studies before we start the negotiations. We just started to trying to observe the effect of the investment treaty that we signed. It's not even ratified yet. So your parliament and our parliament will be ratifying it in the near future. Then we'll start thinking how we can promote. And another argument that I would make, of course, I'm not against this kind of a study at this point. I'm neutral to it. But another argument that I would like to throw in here is multilateral character of Japan brand, and we invest huge in other countries. So what we produce is not coming only from Japan, inside from Japan. So one day I was live in Sabutalo, and I dropped into a small local pharmacy, and I looked and saw Japan brand made blood pressure machine, small equipment, and the company has Japan brand. Unfortunately, I didn't look the package where it is made, but I'm sure, almost 100% sure, it's made in somewhere else in Asia, most likely in China, maybe in Vietnam or Malaysia, I don't know. But this will be counted as, if it's Chinese made, then part of the China Georgia trade. Another example is, of course, you see a huge amount of Japanese cars running all over Tbilisi. And many of Japanese cars are nowadays produced outside Japan. We produce cars, Corolla in Turkey, produce lots of cars in United Kingdom, United States, Canada, and elsewhere. So, and of course, you import a lot of not just new cars from these countries, but also used cars, maybe from other countries of Europe or in Asia. And those are counted as part of the bilateral trade of between Georgia and those countries. So it's not part of Japan-Georgia trade, but the production of the manufactured goods are based on Japanese technology and Japanese manufacturing. Although maybe the labor is maybe employed in Turkey, and managers were Turkish people who are able to manage all this complicated manufacturing process. So I would say that because of this nature of multilateral trade mechanism, as well as very long supply chain, I think just looking at bilateral trade agreement is not enough. We need to think about something else, even wider. Just another note on that is that even if you buy cars from Japan, maybe the parts are made in somewhere else. And maybe under Japanese brand, but somebody else is making. So, the nature of long supply chain and multiple nature of manufacturing in these days are really something that you need to consider. I can continue on and on. Smartphones, you see made in China, but they use Japanese materials. If you look at the screen, maybe part of it is made in Japan. They have to import from Japan, but assembled in China. So I will stop here. But that's the answer to your question.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I know there are many other questions, but time limit does not allow us more. So we hope to host you here some other time again, so we can ask those remaining questions. And let's us have one more round of applause for this excellent.